The whiskey bottle shattered against the saloon wall 3 inches from Eleanor Hartley's head, and she knew in that instant her carefully rebuilt life in Redemption, Texas was about to crumble like sun-baked clay. It was late June in 1882, and the afternoon heat pressed down on the dusty town like a smithy's hammer. Eleanor had been living in Redemption for 8 peaceful months, working as a seamstress in Mrs. Patterson's dress shop and keeping to herself. She had come west from Missouri after her parents died of influenza, leaving behind painful memories and seeking a fresh start in the sprawling Texas frontier. At 22 years old, she had finally begun to feel like she belonged somewhere, like the whispers of her past might stay buried under 1,000 miles of prairie grass. But the past had a way of finding you, even in the vastness of the West. The bottle had been thrown by a drunk cowhand, but it was the woman standing in the saloon doorway who made Eleanor's blood run cold. Constance Hartley, her cousin, stood there with a traveling bag at her feet and a smile that could cut glass. They had the same grandmother, the same high cheekbones and dark hair, but where Eleanor's green eyes held warmth and honesty, Constance's brown ones glittered with something sharp and calculating. "Well, well," Constance said, her voice carrying across the dusty street, "if it is not my dear cousin Eleanor, or should I say, the woman who tried to steal my fiancé back in St. Louis?" The words landed like a physical blow. Eleanor felt every eye on the street turn toward her. The handful of people going about their afternoon business stopped mid-stride. Mrs. Patterson, who had been sweeping the boardwalk in front of the dress shop, froze with her broom in hand. "Constance," Eleanor managed, her voice barely above a whisper, "that is not true. You know it is not true." Constance stepped into the street, her travel-stained dress doing nothing to diminish the theatrical quality of her presence. She had always been good at commanding attention, at making herself the center of any room she entered. "Is it not? Then why did I find you in his study that night, alone with him, your dress half unbuttoned?" Eleanor's face flushed hot. "I already explained what happened. He cornered me. He was drunk, and I was trying to get away from him. You know that. You know I would never betray you like that." But even as she said it, Eleanor could see the doubt spreading through the crowd like ink in water. People who had smiled at her that morning now looked at her with suspicion. The frontier was a place where a person's reputation was everything, and Constance had just thrown hers into question with a few well-chosen words. "You always were a talented liar," Constance said, shaking her head with mock sadness. "That is why I had to break off my engagement. I could not marry a man who had been seduced by my own cousin. The scandal nearly destroyed our family." "That is not what happened," Eleanor's voice broke. She could feel tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of everyone. "He tried to force himself on me. I pushed him away. I told you the truth, and you chose not to believe me because you wanted to blame someone other than the man you thought you loved." Constance laughed, a brittle sound that echoed off the false-fronted buildings. "Always the victim, are you not, Eleanor? First you ruin my life, then you run away to Texas to escape the consequences of your actions, but I have found you now. And I think the good people of Redemption deserve to know exactly who they have welcomed into their community." Eleanor felt the world tilting around her. This could not be happening. Not again. She had worked so hard to build a new life here, to leave behind the ugliness of what had happened in St. Louis. Constance's former fiancé, Richard Thornton, had been a respected banker's son, charming in public and cruel in private. The night Constance was talking about, he had trapped Eleanor in his study during a party, tried to kiss her, and started pulling at her clothes. She had fought him off and run, but Constance had found them just as Eleanor was escaping, her dress disheveled from the struggle. Instead of believing her cousin, Constance had chosen to believe Richard's version of events, that Eleanor had tried to seduce him. The engagement had been broken off, but not because Constance believed Eleanor. It had ended because Richard, faced with the scandal, had left St. Louis entirely, abandoning Constance and making her a source of gossip and pity. Constance had blamed Eleanor for everything, and apparently 8 months and 1,000 miles had done nothing to cool her cousin's anger. "I think you should leave," Eleanor said quietly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You have said your piece. Now please just go." "Oh, I am not going anywhere," Constance replied sweetly. "I have traveled all this way to start fresh, just like you did. I think I will stay in Redemption for a while. It seems like such a friendly town." The crowd was growing now. More people had emerged from the buildings lining the main street, drawn by the commotion. Eleanor recognized faces from the church, from the general store, from the restaurant where she sometimes took her meals. All of them watching, all of them listening, all of them wondering if what Constance said was true. Then a voice cut through the murmuring crowd, deep and steady. "I think the lady asked you to leave." Eleanor turned to see a man stepping forward from the group gathered outside the saloon. He was tall, probably 6 feet or more, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who spent his days working hard under the Texas sun. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty denim trousers, a worn shirt, a leather vest, and a hat pulled low over his eyes. But it was his face that caught Eleanor's attention, strong-jawed and sun-bronzed, with intelligent gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She had seen him around town before, though they had never spoken. He worked at the Lazy K Ranch about 5 miles outside Redemption, and he came into town every week or so for supplies. She had noticed him, the way any woman might notice a handsome man, but she had been too focused on building her new life to think about romance or courtship. "And who might you be?" Constance asked, looking the cowboy up and down with an appraising eye. "Name is James Cartwright," he said evenly, "and I have been living in this town long enough to know that Eleanor Hartley is one of the most decent, honest people you could hope to meet. So when you come in here throwing accusations around, I have got to wonder about your motives." Constance's eyes narrowed. "You do not know anything about this situation, Mr. Cartwright? This is a family matter." "Maybe so," James replied, taking another step forward. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, unhurried but purposeful. "But you made it a public matter when you started airing your grievances in the middle of Main Street. And from where I am standing, it sounds like you are telling one side of a story and expecting everyone to take your word for it without question." "I am telling the truth," Constance insisted, but some of the certainty had left her voice. "Are you?" James looked around at the assembled crowd. "Seems to me that if someone wanted to ruin another person's reputation, the easiest way to do it would be to tell a story that cannot be proven one way or another." He said, she said, "No witnesses, just accusations, especially if the person doing the accusing has an axe to grind." Eleanor stared at James, hardly daring to believe that someone was defending her. In St. Louis, no one had stood up for her. Her friends had drifted away, uncomfortable with the scandal. Even members of her own family had given her cold looks and whispered behind her back. She had left Missouri feeling completely alone, convinced that she would never trust anyone again. "You know nothing about me or my cousin," Constance said, her voice rising. "Eleanor has always been jealous of me. She wanted what I had, and she tried to take it." "That is a lie." Eleanor finally found her voice again. "I never wanted Richard. I thought he was pompous and cruel. And I tried to tell you that, but you would not listen. You were so blinded by his money and his family name that you could not see what he really was." "How dare you?" Constance hissed. "You ruined my life." "No," Eleanor shot back, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "Richard ruined your life when he abandoned you. I was the only one who tried to warn you about him, and this is how you repay me. By following me here and trying to destroy what little I have managed to rebuild." The crowd was silent now, watching the two women face off in the dusty street. Eleanor could feel her heart pounding, could feel 8 months of suppressed anger and hurt rising to the surface. James spoke again, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "Miss Hartley, I do not know what happened between you and your cousin back in Missouri, but I do know that in the time Eleanor has been in Redemption, she has worked hard, kept her word, and treated everyone with kindness and respect. That counts for something in my book. Maybe you should think about why you are really here and what you hope to accomplish by tearing her down." Constance opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, another voice joined the conversation. "The boy has got a point, Constance." Eleanor's stomach dropped as a man pushed through the crowd. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and the well-fed look of someone who had never known a day of hard labor. He wore a suit that was too heavy for the Texas heat, and his face was flushed and sweating. "Uncle George," Eleanor breathed. George Hartley was Constance's father and Eleanor's uncle on her mother's side. She had not seen him since the funeral for her parents. "Eleanor," George said with a tight nod. He did not look happy to see her. "Constance, we talked about this. I told you that coming here was a bad idea." "Papa, I have every right to tell people what she did," Constance protested. "What she supposedly did," George corrected wearily. "I told you then, and I am telling you now. I never believed that girl tried to seduce Richard. I know she is your cousin, and you are angry about how things turned out, but spreading lies is not going to change the past." Eleanor felt her knees go weak. Her uncle believed her? All this time, she had thought her entire family had turned against her. Constance's face had gone pale with shock and anger. "Papa, how can you say that? You know what happened. You know what she did." "I know that Richard Thornton was a snake who charmed you and then showed his true colors," George said firmly. "I know that your mother and I tried to tell you he was not good enough for you, but you would not listen. And I know that when everything fell apart, you needed someone to blame, so you blamed Eleanor. But that does not make it true." "I cannot believe you are taking her side," Constance said, her voice shaking. "I am not taking sides. I am telling the truth." George turned to face the crowd. "My daughter has been through a difficult time, and she has let her anger get the better of her judgment. Eleanor Hartley is a good girl who never did anything to deserve the treatment she received back in St. Louis. If anyone in this town wants to judge her based on my daughter's accusations, then they will have to go through me first." The tension in the air shifted. People in the crowd began to murmur to each other, and Eleanor could see the suspicion in their eyes fading. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her expression softening. "Eleanor, dear, I never doubted you for a moment," the older woman said, which was probably not entirely true, but Eleanor appreciated the sentiment. "You have been nothing but reliable and honest in your work for me. Whatever happened in your past, it does not change the person you are now." Other voices joined in, people expressing their support or at least their willingness to reserve judgment. Eleanor felt tears welling up again, but this time they were tears of relief rather than despair. James Cartwright caught her eye and gave her a small nod, a gesture of solidarity that made her heart skip in an unexpected way. There was something in his expression, a quiet strength and decency that drew her like a lodestone. In that moment, with the whole town watching and her reputation hanging by a thread, he had stepped forward to defend her without even knowing her story. That took courage and character, and Eleanor found herself wanting very much to know him better. Constance was staring at her father with an expression of betrayal and fury. "I cannot believe you are humiliating me like this in front of all these strangers." "You humiliated yourself when you decided to air family business in the street," George said not unkindly. "Now come on. We are going to find a hotel, and tomorrow we are going back to St. Louis." "I am not going anywhere," Constance said stubbornly. "Yes, you are," George replied, his voice taking on a note of paternal authority that brooked no argument. "You have caused enough trouble for one day. We are leaving, and that is final." He took his daughter by the arm and began steering her away from the crowd. Constance resisted for a moment, then seemed to deflate, her anger giving way to something that looked almost like shame. As they walked past Eleanor, George paused. "I am sorry," he said quietly, "for everything you went through. Your mother was my favorite sister, and I should have done more to help you after she passed. I should have stood up for you when all of this happened with Richard." Eleanor felt a lump forming in her throat. Thank you, Uncle George. That means more to me than you know. He nodded, squeezed her hand briefly, then continued walking, guiding his daughter toward the hotel at the end of the street. The crowd began to disperse, people drifting back to their business with the satisfied air of those who had witnessed a good show. Eleanor stood in the middle of the street, feeling drained and overwhelmed. You all right, miss? James Cartwright was still there, standing a respectful distance away but clearly concerned. Eleanor took a shaky breath. I think so. I just need a moment. Take all the time you need. He glanced around at the few remaining onlookers. Maybe you would like to sit down somewhere, get out of the sun? She nodded gratefully. James gestured toward a bench in front of the general store and they walked over together. Eleanor sank onto the worn wood, her legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. James sat down beside her, keeping a proper distance but close enough that she could feel the solid, reassuring presence of him. Thank you, Eleanor said after a moment, for speaking up. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did, James replied simply. It was not right what she was doing. Trying to ruin someone's name like that, especially when she does not have any proof. She believes she has proof, Eleanor said softly. She believes her own version of events so strongly that nothing else matters. James was quiet for a moment, then said, You want to talk about it? What really happened? Eleanor looked at him, searching his face for any sign of judgment or prurient curiosity. She found only genuine interest and compassion. Something about his steady gray eyes made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in a long time. Her fiancé tried to force himself on me, Eleanor said, the words coming out in a rush. We were at a party at his family's house. I went looking for the powder room and got turned around in the hallways. He found me, said he would show me the way, and then steered me into his study instead. He locked the door. He started saying things, inappropriate things, and then he tried to kiss me. When I pushed him away, he grabbed my arms and started pulling at my dress. I managed to knee him and get to the door, but Constance saw me leaving the study with my dress messed up. She assumed the worst. And her fiancé let her believe you were to blame, James said, his voice hard. He said I had thrown myself at him, that I had been flirting with him all evening and followed him to the study. He said he had to fight me off. Eleanor laughed bitterly, and Constance believed him, because admitting the truth would have meant admitting she was engaged to a man who would do something like that. That is not on you, James said firmly. None of that is your fault. I know that in my head, Eleanor replied, but sometimes it is hard to believe it in my heart, especially when people I loved and trusted turned their backs on me. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the town go about its business. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Eleanor felt the tension slowly draining from her shoulders, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. I came here to start over, she said quietly. I thought if I could just get far enough away, I could leave all of that behind, build a new life where no one knew about the scandal. You still can, James said. Your uncle backed you up. People heard him say that he believed you, that his daughter was wrong. That is going to carry weight. Maybe. Eleanor wanted to believe him, but she had learned the hard way that reputations were fragile things. Or maybe people will always wonder, always have that little seed of doubt in the back of their minds. Then they are fools, James said bluntly. I have been watching you since you came to town, Eleanor Hartley, not in a strange way, he added quickly, and she could see a faint flush creeping up his neck. Just, noticing. You work hard, you are kind to people, you do not gossip or put on airs. That is worth more than any rumor or accusation. Eleanor felt her own cheeks warming. You have been noticing me? Hard not to, James admitted, his gray eyes meeting hers. You're about the prettiest woman I have ever seen, and that is a fact. But it is more than that. There is something about you, something genuine. Like you are exactly who you appear to be. No games or pretense. That is rare. Eleanor's heart was beating faster now, and not from fear or stress. I have noticed you too, she said softly. I have seen you around town. You work at the Lazy K Ranch? For the past 3 years, James confirmed. Came down from Montana looking for work and ended up staying. It is good land, good people. The owner, Mr. Kendrick, he treats his hands fair, pays decent wages. I have been saving up, thinking maybe one day I will have enough to buy my own place. That is a good dream, Eleanor said. She found herself wanting to know more about him, about his life and his plans for the future. What made you come down from Montana? James shrugged. Restlessness, mostly. My parents died when I was young. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I was raised by my uncle on his ranch, but after he passed, the place went to my cousin. He made it clear I was not really welcome to stay, so I struck out on my own. That was about 5 years ago, when I was 20. Been drifting and working ever since, trying to find a place that feels like home. Have you found it? Eleanor asked. James looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Starting to think I might have, he said quietly. The air between them seemed to crackle with something Eleanor could not quite name. It was attraction, certainly, but it was more than that. It was the feeling of recognition, of seeing something in another person that resonated with something deep inside yourself. They were both orphans, both searching for a place to belong, both trying to build new lives from the broken pieces of their pasts. I should get back to the shop, Eleanor said reluctantly. Mrs. Patterson will be wondering what happened to me. I was supposed to finish hemming a dress this afternoon. Let me walk you, James offered, standing and extending his hand to help her up. Eleanor took his hand, feeling the warm, calloused strength of it, and let him pull her to her feet. They walked the short distance to the dress shop, neither of them speaking, but both acutely aware of each other's presence. When they reached the door, Eleanor turned to face him. Thank you again, she said, for everything you did today. I do not think I would have gotten through it without you. You would have, James said with certainty. You are stronger than you think, but I am glad I could help. He hesitated, then added, I know this might not be the best time to ask given everything that just happened, but would you maybe want to have dinner with me sometime, when you're feeling up to it? Eleanor felt a smile spreading across her face, the first genuine smile she had felt all day. I would like that very much. How about tomorrow evening? There is that little restaurant next to the hotel, the one that makes the good stew. Tomorrow sounds perfect, Eleanor agreed. James tipped his hat to her, his own smile making him look younger and somehow even more handsome. I will pick you up at 6 if that works. 6 is perfect. Eleanor watched him walk away, his long strides carrying him back toward the livery stable where he had probably left his horse. She felt lighter somehow, as if the confrontation with Constance, as painful as it had been, had also lifted a weight she had been carrying. Her uncle believed her. People in town had rallied to her defense, and James Cartwright, a good man who barely knew her, had stood up for her honor in front of everyone. Maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right. Inside the dress shop, Mrs. Patterson was waiting with eager eyes and 1,000 questions. Eleanor answered them as best she could, recounting the confrontation and its resolution. The older woman listened with the rapt attention of someone who loved a good story. And when Eleanor was finished, she reached out and patted her hand. I'm glad your uncle set things straight, Mrs. Patterson said. And I'm especially glad that young James Cartwright spoke up for you. That boy has a good heart. He helped my husband fix our roof last summer, would not take a penny for his trouble. Said he was just being neighborly. Eleanor felt warmth spreading through her chest. Everything she had seen and heard about James suggested he was exactly the kind of man he appeared to be, honest and decent and kind. After her experience with Richard Thornton, who had hidden his true nature behind a charming facade, Eleanor found James's straightforward goodness deeply appealing. She finished her work for the day, carefully hemming the dress and putting the finishing touches on a blouse that Mrs. Patterson had been commissioned to make. As she worked, her mind kept drifting to James, to the way he had looked at her, to the quiet strength in his voice when he had defended her. She had not been looking for romance when she came to redemption. After what had happened in St. Louis, she had convinced herself that she was better off alone, that trusting another person with her heart was too risky. But James made her want to take that risk. That evening, as Eleanor walked back to the boarding house where she rented a small room, she saw Constance and Uncle George sitting on the porch of the hotel. Constance looked sullen and red-eyed, like she had been crying. Uncle George just looked tired. When he saw Eleanor, he stood up and walked over to meet her at the edge of the hotel's property. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than I expected," Eleanor admitted. "Uncle George, I cannot tell you how much it meant to me that you spoke up. I thought everyone in the family believed Constance's version of events." George shook his head. "Your aunt and I never believed it, not for a second. We knew Richard was no good, and we knew you would never do something like that. But Constance was so hurt and angry, and we did not want to make things worse by contradicting her. I see now that was a mistake. We should have stood by you." "It is not too late," Eleanor said. "You stood by me today, and that is what matters." "Constance is going to come around eventually," George said, though he did not sound entirely convinced. "She is not a bad person, Eleanor. She's just hurt and confused, and she has let that hurt turn into anger. Give her time." Eleanor nodded, though privately she was not sure time would make any difference. Constance had spent 8 months nurturing her anger and resentment, building up a narrative in which Eleanor was the villain. That kind of belief system did not crumble overnight, even when confronted with evidence to the contrary. "We are leaving on the noon stage tomorrow," George continued. "I think it is best if we get back to St. Louis as quickly as possible. Let things settle down." "That is probably for the best," Eleanor agreed. "Will you tell Aunt Martha I asked after her?" "I will." George hesitated, then pulled Eleanor into a brief, awkward hug. "Take care of yourself, Eleanor. And if you ever need anything, you write to me, you hear?" "I hear," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Uncle George." She continued on to the boarding house, where she climbed the stairs to her small room on the second floor. It was not much, just a bed, a washstand, a small wardrobe, and a chair by the window. But it was hers. She had made it comfortable with a few personal touches, a quilt her mother had made, a photograph of her parents in a simple frame, a vase where she kept whatever wildflowers she could find growing outside of town. Eleanor sat by the window and looked out at Redemption as the sun set. The town was quiet in the evening, just a few people moving along the boardwalks, horses tied up outside the saloon, the distant sound of a piano playing somewhere. It was a far cry from the bustling streets of St. Louis, but Eleanor found she preferred it. There was an honesty to the frontier, a directness in the way people dealt with each other. Life was hard out here, and people did not have time for elaborate social games or pretense. She thought about James, about the way he had stepped forward without hesitation to defend her. In St. Louis, her male friends had melted away when the scandal broke, unwilling to associate themselves with someone whose reputation was in question. But James, who barely knew her, had put himself in the middle of a public confrontation because he believed it was the right thing to do. That took courage. It also suggested a man who operated according to a strong moral code, someone who could be trusted to do what was right even when it was difficult or uncomfortable. Eleanor found herself very much looking forward to dinner tomorrow evening. The next day passed slowly. Eleanor went to work at the dress shop, enduring the curious looks and whispered conversations that followed her wherever she went. Most people were kind, expressing their support or simply treating her normally. But there were a few who seemed disappointed that the scandal had fizzled out so quickly. She ignored them as best she could, focusing on her work and counting down the hours until 6 o'clock. At noon, she watched from the window of the dress shop as Constance and Uncle George boarded the stagecoach. Constance did not look back as the coach pulled away, but Uncle George caught Eleanor's eye through the window and gave her a small wave. Then they were gone, disappearing in a cloud of dust down the road that led east. Eleanor felt a complex mix of emotions, relief that Constance was gone, sadness that their relationship had deteriorated so completely, gratitude that her uncle had finally stood up for her. She wondered if she would ever see either of them again, and if so, whether things would ever be right between her and Constance. But mostly she felt hope. Hope that she could truly put the past behind her now. Hope that redemption would be the fresh start she had been looking for. and hoped that tonight's dinner with James might be the beginning of something wonderful. At 5 o'clock, Mrs. Patterson shooed her out of the shop with a knowing smile. "Go make yourself pretty for that handsome cowboy," the older woman said, "and do not worry about coming in late tomorrow if things go well." Eleanor blushed, but did not deny that she was excited about the evening ahead. She hurried back to the boarding house and spent the next hour getting ready, washing up and putting on her best dress, a simple but flattering blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned her dark hair up in a style that was neat but not too formal, and even dabbed a bit of rose water on her wrists. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, she saw a woman who looked hopeful and alive, in a way she had not seen in months. The haunted, hunted look that had followed her from St. Louis was fading, replaced by something brighter. At exactly 6 o'clock, there was a knock on the door downstairs. Eleanor grabbed her shawl and hurried down to find James waiting in the boarding house parlor. He had cleaned up too, wearing a fresh shirt and clean trousers, his hair neatly combed, and his hat in his hands. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart flutter. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "You look very handsome yourself," Eleanor replied, and meant it. They walked together to the restaurant, making small talk about the weather and the town. The restaurant was a modest establishment, just a handful of tables covered with red-checked cloths, but it was clean and the food smelled wonderful. The owner, a jovial man named Mr. Chen who had come from San Francisco, greeted them warmly and showed them to a table by the window. "So," James said after they had ordered, "how are you really doing, after everything that happened yesterday?" Eleanor considered the question. "I think I'm doing all right. It was awful in the moment, but looking back, I'm almost glad it happened. Does that make sense?" "I think so," James said. "Sometimes you need to face something head on before you can truly move past it." "Exactly." Eleanor leaned forward, feeling comfortable enough with him to speak freely. "I have been carrying around this fear that someone from my past would show up and expose what happened in St. Louis. And yesterday that fear came true, but then I realized it was not as bad as I thought it would be. My uncle backed me up. People in town gave me the benefit of the doubt, and you—" She trailed off, suddenly shy. "And I what?" James prompted gently. "And you defended me," Eleanor finished. "You barely know me, but you stood up for me anyway. That meant everything." James reached across the table and took her hand. A bold gesture, but one that felt right. His hand was warm and strong, and Eleanor felt a shiver of something pleasant run through her at the contact. "I did know you," James said. "Maybe not your history or where you came from, but I knew the person you are. I have seen how you treat people, how you carry yourself. That tells me more about your character than any rumor or accusation ever could." Eleanor felt tears pricking at her eyes, but they were good tears. "How are you real?" she asked, half joking. "Where did you come from?" James laughed, a rich, warm sound. "I am just a cowboy trying to make an honest living. Nothing special about me." "I disagree," Eleanor said firmly. "There is something very special about a man who stands up for what is right, even when it would be easier to look the other way." Their food arrived, steaming bowls of beef stew with fresh bread, and they ate and talked for over an hour. The conversation flowed easily, moving from topic to topic without awkward pauses or forced small talk. James told her about his work at the Lazy K, about the horses he was training and the satisfaction of working with animals. Eleanor told him about her sewing, about the pride she took in creating beautiful garments, and about her dreams of maybe one day opening her own shop. "You could do it," James said with conviction. "You have got the skill and the work ethic. All you would need is some capital to get started." "That is the hard part," Eleanor admitted. "I have been saving what I can, but it is going to take years to save enough. And that is assuming nothing goes wrong, no unexpected expenses or emergencies." "Nothing worth having comes easy," James observed. "But I believe you will get there. You are the kind of person who makes things happen." As the evening wore on, Eleanor found herself more and more drawn to James. He was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in what she had to say, and refreshingly honest about his own thoughts and feelings. There was no pretense with him, no attempt to impress her with exaggerated stories or false bravado. He was simply himself, and that self was someone Eleanor could easily imagine spending a great deal of time with. When they finally left the restaurant, the sun had set and the sky was full of stars. Redemption did not have much in the way of street lighting, just a few oil lamps outside the main businesses, so the night sky was clearly visible in all its glory. They walked slowly back toward the boarding house, neither of them in any hurry to end the evening. "I had a wonderful time tonight," Eleanor said as they reached the front steps of the boarding house. "So did I," James replied. He still had not let go of her hand, and she had not pulled away. "Could we do this again soon? I would like that very much. How about Sunday, after church? We could take a ride out to the creek, have a picnic." "That sounds lovely," Eleanor said. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other in the dim light. Eleanor could feel the pull between them, the attraction that went beyond physical appearance to something deeper. James started to lean in, then seemed to catch himself and pulled back. "I should let you get inside," he said, though he sounded reluctant. "It is getting late." Eleanor nodded, understanding that he was being respectful, not wanting to rush things or make assumptions. She appreciated that. Even as part of her wished he had kissed her. There would be time for that, she told herself. They were just getting to know each other, and there was no need to rush. "Good night, James," she said softly. "Good night, Eleanor." She went inside, looking back once to see him still standing there, watching to make sure she got in safely. When she reached her room, she went to the window and looked out to see him walking away down the street, his hands in his pockets and his stride relaxed. She pressed her fingers to the cool glass and smiled. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness. True to his word, James took her on a picnic that Sunday, and they spent a glorious afternoon by the creek, wading in the cool water and talking about everything and nothing. He was attentive without being smothering, interested without being intrusive. He made her laugh with stories about mishaps at the ranch and listened with genuine interest when she talked about her family or her dreams for the future. They saw each other as often as their schedules allowed. James would ride into town on his days off, and they would take walks together or share meals at the restaurant. Sometimes they would just sit on the bench in front of the general store, watching the town go by and enjoying each other's company. Eleanor felt herself falling for him a little more each time they were together, drawn to his quiet strength and steady goodness. The town seemed to approve of their courtship. Mrs. Patterson was delighted, declaring that she had known from the start that James and Eleanor would make a fine couple. Other townspeople smiled and nodded when they saw them together, and Eleanor was grateful that the scandal with Constance seemed to have been largely forgotten. A few people still gave her odd looks occasionally, but for the most part she was judged on her own merits rather than on her cousin's accusations. About a month after their first dinner together, James took Eleanor to meet Mr. Kendrick, the owner of the Lazy K Ranch. The older man was in his 60s, gruff but kind-hearted, and he clearly thought the world of James. "Boy is the best hand I've got, mister," Kendrick told Eleanor as they sat on his porch drinking lemonade. "Smart, hard-working, honest as the day is long. If he is courting you, Miss Hartley, you should know you are getting yourself a good man." "I am beginning to realize that," Eleanor said, glancing at James, who was looking embarrassed but pleased. "He has got big plans, this one," Mr. Kendrick continued. "Wants to have his own spread someday. I told him when that day comes I will be sorry to see him go, but I will do what I can to help him get started." "That is very generous of you," Eleanor said. "Not generous, just smart," Mr. Kendrick replied. "Good men like James are hard to find, and I believe in investing in people who have got potential. Besides, he has practically been like a son to me these past 3 years. My own boys moved back east, wanted nothing to do with ranching. Nice to have someone around who appreciates the life." On the ride back to town, Eleanor brought up what Mr. Kendrick had said. "He really thinks highly of you." "The feeling is mutual," James said. "When I first came to the Lazy K, I was pretty green, did not know half of what I thought I did about working cattle. Mr. Kendrick took the time to teach me, never made me feel stupid for asking questions. I owe him a lot." It sounds like you have become part of his family, Eleanor observed. I suppose I have, James agreed. That is one of the things I have learned being out here. Family is not always about blood. Sometimes it is about the people who show up for you, who help you when you need it, and believe in you when you do not quite believe in yourself. Eleanor thought about that. Her own blood family had been fractured by scandal and misunderstanding, but here in Redemption, she was building something new. Mrs. Patterson had become like a mother to her, teaching her and supporting her. The other townspeople had given her a chance to prove herself. And James, in just a few short weeks, had become someone she could imagine building a life with. As summer turned to early autumn, their relationship deepened. James kissed her for the first time on a warm September evening, as they stood under a cottonwood tree by the creek. It was a sweet, tender kiss that made Eleanor's toes curl and her heart soar. After that, they became more comfortable with physical affection, holding hands freely, stealing kisses when they had a moment of privacy, sitting close together with his arm around her shoulders. Eleanor had never felt this way before. What she had observed between Constance and Richard had been a pale imitation of real romance, all surface flash with no substance underneath. What she felt for James was different. It was grounded in mutual respect and genuine affection, in shared values and compatible dreams. He made her feel safe and cherished, and she hoped she did the same for him. One evening in late October, as they sat together watching the sunset from a hillside outside of town, James turned to her with a serious expression. "Eleanor, there is something I need to talk to you about," he said. Her heart skipped a beat. His tone was solemn, and she could not tell if this was good news or bad. "What is it?" "I have been saving money for a long time," James began, "putting aside every spare dollar, living as frugally as I could, and I have been talking to Mr. Kendrick about land, about what it would take to start a small ranch. There is a property that just came available, about 10 miles north of here. It is not much, just 160 acres with a creek running through it and a small cabin that needs work, but the price is fair and Mr. Kendrick thinks it has good potential. He has even offered to sell me some cattle at a discount to help me get started." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "James, that is wonderful. This is what you have been working toward." "It is," James agreed. "But here is the thing. If I buy this land, I'm going to be stretched thin for a while. All my savings will go into the purchase and the initial stock. I will have to work twice as hard as I do now, building up the ranch while still doing some work for Mr. Kendrick to make ends meet. It is going to be a struggle for the first few years, no guarantees that I will even make it work." "You will make it work," Eleanor said with certainty. "You are one of the most capable, determined people I have ever met." James took both of her hands in his, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Eleanor, I am falling in love with you. I think I started falling that very first day when I saw you standing in the street, facing down your cousin with more courage than most men I know. And every day since then I have fallen a little harder. You are smart and kind and strong, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it." Eleanor felt tears gathering in her eyes. "James, I am falling in love with you too." "Then I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." James took a deep breath. "Will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a struggling rancher with more dreams than money and help me build something that is ours? I cannot promise you an easy life, at least not at first. But I can promise you that I will work every day to make you happy, and I will love you with everything I have for as long as I live." Eleanor felt the tears spilling over now, running down her cheeks. She had not expected this, not tonight, but she realized she had been hoping for it, dreaming of it. The idea of building a life with James, of facing the challenges and joys of frontier life together, filled her with a fierce joy. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you. I cannot think of anything I want more." James let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly. When they finally broke apart, they were both laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the enormity of what they had just committed to. I do not have a ring yet, James said ruefully. I was going to wait until I could afford something nice, but I could not hold the question in any longer. I do not need a ring, Eleanor assured him. All I need is you. They stayed on that hillside until full dark, making plans and dreaming about their future. James explained that if everything went through with the land purchase, they could be married by the end of November. The cabin on the property was rough but livable, and they could fix it up over the winter. Eleanor's mind was already racing with ideas, thinking about curtains and furniture, about a garden she could plant in the spring, about making that little cabin into a real home. When James finally walked her back to the boarding house, they were both giddy with excitement. At the door, he kissed her one more time, slow and sweet and full of promise. I love you, Eleanor Hartley, he said softly. I love you too, James Cartwright, she replied. I cannot wait to become your wife. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. James completed the purchase of the land with Mr. Kendrick's help, signing papers and transferring funds. Eleanor gave notice at the dress shop, though Mrs. Patterson insisted she could still take on sewing work from home if she wanted to help with expenses. The whole town buzzed with the news of the engagement, and Eleanor was touched by how many people seemed genuinely happy for them. They were married on a crisp November morning in the small church at the center of town. Eleanor wore a dress she had made herself, simple white cotton with lace trim, and carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers. James wore his best suit, looking nervous and proud and happier than she had ever seen him. Mr. Kendrick stood up as James's best man, and Mrs. Patterson stood with Eleanor. The ceremony was short and sweet, the words of the vows ringing out in the quiet church. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and James kissed her, Eleanor felt like her heart might burst with joy. This man, this good, honest, hard-working man was hers now. And she was his. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The town threw them a modest reception in the church hall, with food brought by various families and music provided by a fiddle player who lived on a nearby ranch. Eleanor danced with her new husband, laughing as he spun her around the floor with more enthusiasm than grace. Later she danced with Mr. Kendrick and with some of the other men from town, while James danced with Mrs. Patterson and the other ladies. It was a joyful, raucous celebration, and Eleanor could not remember ever being happier. As the sun began to set, James borrowed a wagon from Mr. Kendrick, and they loaded up Eleanor's few belongings along with some supplies and wedding gifts from the townspeople. Then they set off for their new home, the little ranch 10 miles north of Redemption. The cabin was indeed small and rough, just 2 rooms with a stone fireplace and windows that needed new shutters. But James had been working on it for the past few weeks, repairing the roof and fixing the worst of the damage. He had built a rough bed frame and table, and had even installed a small stove for cooking. It was not much, but it was theirs. James carried Eleanor over the threshold, both of them laughing at the clumsiness of it, and set her down gently in the main room. The cabin was cold, so he built up the fire while Eleanor lit the lamps. Then they stood together in the middle of their new home, taking it all in. It is not much, James said, echoing her earlier thoughts. It is perfect, Eleanor replied firmly. It is ours, and that makes it perfect. That night they consummated their marriage in the small bed James had built, discovering each other with tenderness and passion. Eleanor had been nervous, not knowing quite what to expect, but James was patient and gentle, taking his time to make sure she was comfortable and happy. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, listening to the wind outside and the crackle of the fire. Are you happy? James asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. Happier than I ever thought I could be, Eleanor answered honestly. I love you so much, James. I love you too, he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me. I could never regret it, Eleanor said. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, ready to face whatever the future held together. The winter months were hard but rewarding. James worked from before dawn until after dark, caring for the small herd of cattle Mr. Kendrick had sold them and making improvements to the property. Eleanor threw herself into making the cabin comfortable, sewing curtains and cushions, organizing their supplies, and learning to cook on the temperamental stove. She also continued to take in sewing work from town, riding in once a week with James to deliver finished projects and pick up new ones. It was a simple life, but a good one. They had each other. They had work that gave them purpose, and they had a shared vision of what they wanted to build. On the coldest nights, when the wind howled outside and snow piled up against the cabin walls, they would sit by the fire together, Eleanor sewing while James repaired tack or read aloud from the few books they owned. Those quiet evenings were some of Eleanor's favorites, filled with companionable silence and the deep contentment that came from being exactly where she wanted to be. In January, Eleanor wrote a letter to Uncle George, telling him about her marriage and her new life. She did not know if Constance would ever forgive her, but she wanted her uncle to know that she was happy and doing well. A few weeks later, she received a reply. Uncle George congratulated her warmly and said that he and Aunt Martha were pleased to hear she had found a good man. He did not mention Constance, and Eleanor did not ask. As winter turned to spring, the ranch began to come alive. The cattle, which had been tough to care for during the coldest months, started to thrive on the new grass. James worked on expanding the herd, trading labor with neighboring ranchers and slowly building up their stock. Eleanor planted a large garden, growing vegetables that would help feed them and maybe even provide a little extra income if she could sell the surplus in town. Life was not without its challenges. Money was tight, and there were times when Eleanor worried about whether they would make it through. A spring storm killed 2 of their calves, and James was devastated by the loss. But they supported each other through the hard times and celebrated together when things went well. In early summer, Eleanor realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when the town doctor confirmed it during one of their trips to Redemption, she felt a mix of joy and terror. She was going to be a mother. She and James were going to have a child. When she told James that evening, he picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy despite her protests that he should be careful. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, his face glowing with happiness. "Eleanor, we are going to be parents." "Are you ready for this?" Eleanor asked, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. "James, we are barely making ends meet as it is. How are we going to afford a child?" "We will figure it out," James said with the confidence that she had come to love and rely on. "People out here have been having babies with a lot less than we have. We have a roof over our heads, food to eat, and more love than any child could ask for. That is what matters." Eleanor let herself believe him. They would figure it out just like they had figured out everything else. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Eleanor continued to work as long as she could, though she had to give up the longer trips into town as she grew bigger. James was attentive and protective, constantly worrying that she was doing too much or not resting enough. She found his concern endearing, even when it occasionally bordered on annoying. In late December, during a cold snap that left frost on the inside of the windows, Eleanor went into labor. James had arranged for the doctor to come stay with them for a few days around her due date, and the older man was there to help her through the long, difficult process of bringing a new life into the world. After hours of labor, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When the doctor placed the squirming, red-faced infant in her arms, she felt a rush of love so intense it almost hurt. This tiny person, with his shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes, was theirs. He was proof of their love and their commitment to each other, a living symbol of the life they had built together. James, who had been pacing outside during the final stages of labor, burst back into the room the moment the doctor called for him. He stood by the bed, staring down at his wife and son with an expression of awe. "We have a son," Eleanor said softly, her voice hoarse from exertion. "James, we have a son." "He is perfect," James whispered, reaching out to gently touch the baby's tiny hand. "You are perfect." Eleanor, I do not have words for how much I love you right now." They named him Thomas, after James's father, and called him Tommy. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he had a powerful set of lungs that he liked to exercise at 2 in the morning. Eleanor was exhausted in those early weeks, but James helped as much as he could, walking the floor with Tommy when he was fussy, changing diapers, and generally being as involved as any father could be. The seasons turned, and Tommy grew. By the time he was 6 months old, he was sitting up on his own and babbling constantly. Eleanor would set him in a basket near where she worked, singing to him while she sewed or cooked. James would come in from the fields and scoop the boy up, tossing him in the air until Tommy shrieked with laughter and Eleanor scolded them both for being too rough. The ranch was doing better too. They had survived their first full year and were starting to turn a small profit. James had proven to be a skilled rancher, and word was getting around about the quality of his cattle. He was able to hire occasional help during the busiest seasons, which took some of the pressure off. Eleanor's sewing business continued to provide a steady supplementary income, and her garden had produced more than enough vegetables for their needs, with plenty left over to sell or trade. Life was good, better than Eleanor had ever imagined it could be. She thought sometimes about the woman she had been when she first arrived in Redemption, scared and alone, convinced that she would never be able to trust anyone again. That woman seemed like a stranger now. The Eleanor she had become was strong and confident, secure in the love of her husband and the life they had built together. When Tommy was about a year old, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news felt less overwhelming and more like a natural progression. Their little family was growing, and while she knew another child would mean more work and more expense, she also knew they could handle it. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Eleanor's mother, was born in the spring. She was smaller than Tommy had been, with Eleanor's dark hair and delicate features. James declared her the most beautiful baby ever born and proceeded to dote on her shamelessly. Tommy, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to touch her and see what she was doing. The years rolled by, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. There were hard times, a drought one year that tested their resources, a bout of illness that swept through the area, the normal trials of raising children and running a ranch. But there were far more good times. Birthdays and holidays celebrated with friends from town. Long summer evenings with the whole family sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. The pride James felt when he was able to expand their land holdings. The satisfaction Eleanor felt when Tommy started school and proved to be a bright, curious student. By the time Tommy was 10 and Sarah was 9, the ranch had grown into a successful operation. They had a good-sized herd, several horses, and had built a new, bigger house to replace the old cabin. James had become a respected member of the ranching community, known for his fair dealing and quality stock. Eleanor had started teaching Sarah and some of the other girls in the area how to sew, passing on the skills her own mother had taught her. One summer evening, as they sat on the porch of their new house watching their children play in the yard, James reached over and took Eleanor's hand. "You ever regret it?" he asked, "saying yes to me all those years ago, taking a chance on a struggling cowboy with more dreams than sense?" Eleanor laughed. "Not for a single second. You gave me everything I ever wanted, James. A home, a family, a life worth living. How could I possibly regret that?" "I am the one who got the better end of the deal," James said, raising her hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You took a broken-down ranch and a lonely cowboy and turned them into something wonderful." "We did it together," Eleanor corrected. "That is what makes it work." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as Tommy helped Sarah climb a tree, both of them laughing and calling out to their parents to watch. Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the scandal in St. Louis to that confrontation in the street with Constance, to James stepping forward to defend her honor. So much could have gone differently. She could have let the scandal break her, could have hidden away in shame instead of coming west. Constance's accusations could have destroyed her reputation in Redemption, leaving her isolated and alone. But instead, she had found James. And James had given her not just his love, but also his belief in her, his willingness to stand up for her when she needed it most. That single act of courage in front of the whole town had changed everything, had given her the confidence to believe that she deserved happiness, that her past did not have to define her future. "What are you thinking about, Regimanier?" James asked, noticing her reflective expression. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Eleanor said simply, "and how grateful I am that you were brave enough to speak up for me that day." "I would do it again in a heartbeat," James said, 1,000 times over, if that is what it took to get us here. As the sun set over the Texas prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Eleanor leaned her head on her husband's shoulder and felt completely at peace. This was her life now. This ranch, this man, these children. It had not been easy to get here, and there would surely be challenges ahead. But she knew with absolute certainty that as long as she and James faced them together, they could handle anything the world threw at them. The years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their story. Tommy grew into a strong, capable young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. Sarah developed a talent for sewing that surpassed even Eleanor's skills, and dreamed of one day opening a dress shop in town. James and Eleanor added one more child to their family, another son they named Robert, who came as a surprise when Eleanor was 36 and James was 35. By the time Eleanor was in her early 40s, she and James were considered one of the success stories of redemption. Their ranch was thriving, their children were healthy and happy, and they had built a life that was rich in all the ways that mattered. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns, and personal setbacks. But through it all, their love had remained constant. Eleanor occasionally thought about Constance, wondering what had become of her cousin. She had heard through Uncle George, with whom she maintained a cordial correspondence, that Constance had eventually married a merchant in St. Louis. Whether she was happy or not, Eleanor did not know. She hoped her cousin had found peace, had let go of her anger and resentment. But whether Constance had forgiven her or not, Eleanor had forgiven herself. And that was what mattered. One evening, as Eleanor and James sat on their porch watching the sunset over land they had worked so hard to build, James turned to her with a serious expression. "Do you remember what I told you the night I proposed?" he asked. Eleanor smiled, her mind going back over the years to that hillside outside of town, when they had been so young and full of dreams. "You told me a lot of things that night." "I told you I could not promise you an easy life," James said, "but I could promise to love you and work to make you happy for as long as I lived." "I remember," Eleanor said softly. "Well, it has been 19 years, James continued, "and I want you to know that I have meant every word of that promise every single day. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Cartwright. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Eleanor felt tears pricking at her eyes, the good kind of tears that came from being deeply, profoundly moved. "I love you too, James. You saved me, you know. That day when you defended me in front of the whole town, you saved my life." "No," James said, shaking his head. "You saved yourself. You had the courage to start over, to believe you deserved better. All I did was see what was already there and love you for it." They kissed then, a sweet, familiar kiss that still had the power to make Eleanor's heart flutter even after nearly 2 decades of marriage. When they broke apart, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one over the vast Texas sky. Their children were growing up, beginning to think about their own futures. Tommy, at 19, was talking about marrying a girl from a neighboring ranch. Sarah, at 18, had just opened her dress shop in Redemption with Eleanor's help, and was already getting more business than she could handle. Young Robert, only 8, was still more interested in playing with the ranch dogs than thinking about the future. But Eleanor could already see signs of the man he would become in his kind heart and quick mind. She and James had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. Their children would carry on the ranch, would pass it down to their own children, building on the foundation that Eleanor and James had laid with so much hard work and love. "What are you thinking about now?" James asked, and Eleanor realized she had been quiet for several minutes. "I'm thinking about legacy," Eleanor said, "about what we leave behind. We have built a good life here, James, not just for us, but for our children and their children. That matters." "It does," James agreed. "But you know what matters even more? The fact that we did it together, that we chose each other and chose to keep choosing each other every day, even when things got hard. That is the real legacy, Eleanor, not the land or the house or the cattle. It is the example we set for our kids, showing them what real love looks like." Eleanor nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle deep in her heart. They had shown their children what it meant to be partners, to support each other through good times and bad, to build something meaningful through hard work and dedication. That was worth more than any amount of land or money. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, they finally went inside, hand in hand. The house was quiet, the children all in bed or otherwise occupied. In their bedroom, they prepared for sleep with the easy familiarity of long habit. But before they climbed into bed, James pulled Eleanor close and held her, just held her, his arms strong and warm around her. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" Eleanor asked. "For saying yes," James said, "for taking a chance on me, for building this life with me, for everything." "Thank you for asking," Eleanor replied, "and thank you for defending me when I needed it most. Thank you for seeing past the rumors and accusations to the person I really was. Thank you for loving me." They stood there in the lamplight holding each other, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Outside, the Texas wind whispered through the prairie grass, the same wind that had blown through this land for countless generations and would blow for countless more. But here, in this moment, in this room, there was only love and gratitude and the deep, abiding contentment that came from a life well lived. The years ahead would bring their own joys and sorrows, their own challenges and triumphs. Eleanor and James would grow old together, their hair turning gray, their faces lining with the marks of time and experience. They would see their children marry and have children of their own. They would suffer losses and celebrate victories. But through it all, they would have each other. And that would be enough. Because that day in redemption, when James Cartwright had stepped forward to defend Eleanor Hartley's honor in front of the whole town, he had done more than just speak up for a stranger. He had given her back her faith in human goodness, her belief that she deserved to be treated with respect and dignity, and in return she had given him her love, her trust, and her commitment to building a life together. It was a fair trade, Eleanor thought, as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms. More than fair. It was everything she had ever wanted, everything she had thought she would never have, and she was grateful for every single day of it. The wind continued to blow across the prairie, carrying with it the sounds of cattle lowing in the distance and the rustle of grass bending beneath its touch. In the little house on the ranch 10 miles north of Redemption, Texas, two people slept peacefully, secure in their love and the life they had built together. And that, Eleanor knew, was the happiest ending anyone could ask for. Not perfect, because life was never perfect, but real and true and filled with love. They had weathered every storm together, overcome every obstacle, and emerged stronger for it. Their story, which had begun with scandal and accusation, had transformed into one of redemption and hope, of courage and unwavering devotion. As morning came and the sun rose over the Texas prairie once more, Eleanor woke to find James already up, making coffee in the kitchen. The smell of it drifted through the house, mingling with the sounds of their children beginning to stir. It was the start of another day, another chance to build on what they had created, another opportunity to love and be loved. Eleanor rose and dressed, pinning up her hair and looking at herself in the mirror. She saw a woman who had been tested and had not broken, who had faced down her demons and come out victorious. She saw a wife, a mother, A rancher, a businesswoman, she saw someone who had earned her happiness through perseverance and courage. But most of all, she saw someone who was loved deeply and truly by a good man who had stood up for her when it mattered most. And that made all the difference.